Thank you very much, and thanks especially to the organizers for bringing us all together. This is a day of amazing remembrances and very moving and rich experiences that we're hearing. I want to go back to the time I first met Ben. I had finished a master's degree at Yale and then come to Manila to work with the Ford Foundation. I was supposed to go back to Yale to start my PhD. Met Edna, decided I needed to stay on and do language study for as long as possible. So I studied Tagalog here in Quezon City first, and then I went off to Salatiga, studied Indonesian, and then came back and well, I'd forgotten all my Tagalog at that point, and studied Tagalog again, and then went back to the U.S. in April, and I was trying to decide whether I would stay at Yale, which was the original plan, or perhaps go to Cornell. So I drove up to Ithaca, and of course I knew the work of Benedict Anderson very well from being a student of Jim Scott's at Yale and all of the readings that we did of Ben's. But he was Benedict Anderson to me. He was a very intimidating figure, and our first meeting did nothing to dispel that intimidation. So I went into his office, and I remember it was kind of dark, and he was sitting there, and I was saying that I'd done my study of Tagalog in Indonesia, and I planned to do a dissertation on crony capitalism in Indonesia under Suharto and the Philippines under Marcos. I wanted to do a comparative study. And at that point, Ben Anderson gave me one of those looks. For what seemed to be just an interminable time, he just stared at me over the top of his glasses and then said, "Really, it's better at this point in your career just to study one country." So it was decided. It was an ex cathedra pronouncement. I felt like I was in the cathedral. I had just heard the word from the Archbishop. And from that point on, I went on and did a single country study of the bank. Well, let's see, at that point I wasn't sure. I knew I wanted to do something on government business relations in the Philippines. Of course, that later became a study of the banking sector in the Philippines. So I went back to, decided to stay at Yale. Very happy to have Jim Scott as my mentor, a wonderful mentor. But then I had the great fortune of coming to the Philippines on a Fulbright at the same time that Ben Anderson was here on a Fulbright. So I had the advantage of two mentors, the two pillars of Southeast Asian, the study of Southeast Asian politics. So I was here at that time, 89, 90, when Ben was just going around town doing the most interesting things. Anvil Ocampo has already put that in his memorial that was in the Inquirer the other day. Of course, he was in the archives, but he was going off to the movies a lot, you know, just going off to the movies in the middle of the afternoon, coming back and, you know, having some observation about Philippine movie stars. He would go to the cemeteries, and then he was, of course, watching coup d'etats, coup attempts. So I had my own research, so I couldn't join him on those various ventures. But I got to hear about them regularly when we had chances to drink beer together, which was a frequent occasion, usually at Trellis back in the day. So he would have been, say, at Lopez Museum, and he would say, "How odd! Do you know I was looking at the newspapers from the period of the Japanese occupation, and they were watching Hollywood movies in 1943." Right? I mean, those were just some of the observations that he would come up with, and we've already heard, you know, what's odd about it being such a common thing. I felt at the time, if I could just get 5 pesos for every time Ben said the word weird, bizarre, or odd, I would be an incredibly rich man. So he was off doing a lot of this, very interesting work in culture, political culture. And the one attempt I made, just once, to try to connect with the cultural analysis was to say, well, interestingly, when I was growing up in Ames, Iowa, we had tinkling as part of the curriculum in our physical education class. Pause. Ben looked at me, got this very mischievous look in his face, and he said, yeah, that's a good place for it to end up. So I decided from that point on, we'll stick to conversations of politics. But the word generosity has come forth many times here today. Ben was a great and generous mentor to me. Like I say, I had him as a second mentor, and just felt enormous debt of gratitude to him for all the time that he took at critical stages of my research to give me guidance on very substantive matters, and guidance just on how to navigate things within this strange academic world that I was going into. And I remember at one point, I actually discovered Max Weber not in New Haven, Connecticut, but at the Ateneo Library, at the Rizal Library at Ateneo. I just started reading Weber and realized, this really seemed to have a lot of resonance with what I was learning about in terms of the patrimonial nature of the banking sector. The word patrimonial had been introduced to me by Jim Scott, but somehow I was much more towards the dependency side of things then, and it really didn't sink in. But the longer I was here, and I was just looking at all these personalistic ties and the importance of family and trying to understand the nature of the Philippine bureaucracy, I drifted towards Weber. And my goodness, does Ben Anderson know his Weber, right? I mean, he probably hadn't looked at economy and society for a long time, but he could come back at me with all of these insights. And one of the insights that really stuck with me was when he said, if you go with Weber, you'll do well. He said, Marx and Weber were both really smart guys, and you can't go wrong with either one. So I took that to heart, and of course this is a time in which Ben had just published Cacique Democracy. He was moving into really important pioneering work in Philippine politics, and it was a great honor to be with him in the midst of those explorations. Ben was also a dear friend to Edna and I, so much so that we were honored to have him as Nino when we baptized our eldest child, our daughter Anna, in mid-1990. And we enjoyed the chance to get together with him throughout the years overlapping. So I remember once I think around 1992, where he was visiting Boston, and the three of us went out with Ben to dinner. I have this vivid memory of how he wanted to make sure that Anna's winter coat was zipped up because it was very cold and he didn't want her to be too exposed to the wind. And I thought to myself, is this the same intimidating Benedict Anderson that I had met 5 years ago? This was, he could be very paternal, very caring, and saw that in how he interacted with our daughter. Ben fortunately had a chance to get to Madison, Wisconsin, my first year of teaching there. I came out to Ithaca, drove all the way from one dairyland to another to give a talk, and was hosted by him there. He was very disappointed. I was so busy the first year of teaching everything else. He had me lead one of his graduate seminars, and I wasn't particularly well prepared for that, and always felt bad that I had kind of disappointed him at that occasion, always wanting to be as well prepared as possible, particularly with Ben. But he hosted a dinner at his house, and this must be soon after he'd done the remodeling, because he was so excited to take us around to his new kitchen. which we've already heard about, right? And he said, look at this wood, it's so beautifully mestizo. So he was always relating it back in some way to Southeast Asia. And then I had the honor to be at the AES when he got a Lifetime Achievement Award. I remember Jim Scott saying at the time, you know, this bottle of champagne known as Imagine Communities has no doubt launched many ships on journeys that you never recognized. He was someone who, as we know, always interacted with people, with young scholars, with generosity. Most recently, Ed and I are grateful to have seen him just downstairs here and here at the was that April at the book launch, reminiscing about old friends and acquaintances from 25 years with lots of jovial discussion. In closing, I want to go back to 1994, Madison, Wisconsin, my first year of teaching, and I announced to my Southeast Asian politics class that Benedict Anderson was coming to give a talk to our Southeast Asia Friday Forum. To which one student, a master's student, said, "Oh my gosh, Benedict Anderson? He's so famous I thought he was dead." Well, here we are. 2000, and that was actually used in the introduction of Ben. He got a big charge out of that student's comment. So here we are, 2015. Ben is still famous, but he's no longer with us. And how blessed are those of us as scholars for everything he has done to shape and reshape our understanding of the region and the world, and how blessed are those of us who have been able to call him our friend. Thank you.